The Angus Sire benchmarking program has demonstrated that there's great potential to achieve genetic improvement in Angus breeding programs by utilising selection tools such as estimated breeding values and selection indexes. A recent project undertaken by Angus Australia with funding assistance from the MLA donor company analysed whether the EBVs for each individual sire entered in cohorts 5, 6 and 7 when initially joined in the ASBP program differed considerably from the sire's EBV at the end of the program, by which time their progeny had been comprehensively performance recorded. The project builds on previous work which examined cohorts 1, 2 and 3. The project examined the impact on an individual EBV within cohort 6 for 200-day growth by examining the bull's EBVs when they were entered into the ASBP to the EBVs calculated at the end of the project after their progeny data had been included. The project found that the average of cohort 6 for 200-day growth didn't change with the inclusion of progeny performance information, with a small degree of movement observed within the average of the highest 10 and lowest 10 200-day growth EBV sires. The following graph examines the 41 individual sires within cohort 6 for 200-day growth. In this graph, the blue bars represent the bull's initial EBVs when they first joined the ASBP, while the orange bar represents the final EBVs of each sire at the end of the project, when all the progeny performance data had been included in the EBVs calculation. While the EBVs for some sires increased, some decreased and some remained unchanged, there was not a significant amount of re-ranking observed. That is, the EBVs of a sire who had a low initial EBV may have increased, but the sire's EBV would still be relatively low by comparison to the other sires. With a small number of exceptions, bulls that started off with a high 200-day growth EBV also finished the program with a high 200-day growth EBV, while sires that started with a low 200-day growth EBV also finished with a lower 200-day growth EBV. To examine if the change for the individual sires were within the expected range, we first need to examine the accuracy figure, which is produced alongside each EBV. The accuracy provides an indication of the amount of information that's gone into the EBV's calculation. The higher the accuracy, the more likely the EBV is to predict the animal's true breeding value, and the less likely the EBV is to change. The average accuracy of the bull's 200-day growth EBV at the start of the program was 75%, indicating that some change in the EBV's value should be expected when the progeny performance recording from the ASBP is included in the calculation. To assess whether the movement observed was within the expected range, the standard error based on the accuracy for each EBV was calculated. Statistically, the initial EBV for each sire is not expected to change more than one standard error for 7 out of 10 sires, based on a bell curve distribution for expected change. The project found that the EBVs for 31 of the 41 sires, or 76%, did not change more than one standard error, indicating that the changes observed were within the expected ranges. To look at this in more detail on an individual sire basis, the following graph was produced. The graph shows for each sire, based on their initial 200-day growth EBV, the range of expected change to one standard error, shown with the blue bar, and the bull's final EBV shown with the red marker. The project has shown clearly that there was, on average, minimal change in the EBV of sires in cohorts 5, 6 and 7 of the ASBP, and the initial EBVs of the sires, despite being of low accuracy, describe the relative genetic merit of the sires well. The changes that were observed to the EBVs of individual sires, both in terms of the number of individual sires whose EBVs changed and the magnitude of those changes, were within the expected ranges based on the accuracies of the sire's initial EBVs. The outcome for the project demonstrated that EBVs are a reliable selection tool, and beef producers should use EBVs with confidence to identify genetics that are most aligned with their breeding objectives, and in turn to achieve long-term sustainable genetic improvement. Most sires will perform as predicted by their EBVs, and while some individual sires may perform better or worse than predicted by their EBV, the EBV will on average provide a reliable indicator of the genetics that a sire can deliver to a breeding program.